Hey percussion educators, today we're talking about drum set grooves. My name is Patrick Blakley and I have tons of percussion content over at patrickblakely.com, including the adaptive drum set groove generator. So this is something I wrote to generate random drum grooves that are refined by the options and metrics you set below. So essentially there are 4 beats here divided into 16th note spaces, and each cell in this grid has a 50-50% chance of generating a note or not. When you push the red button, the groove changes. So right now we have it selected to just change the bass drum. We'll go through all of these in a bit, but essentially you're creating new grooves around certain skills and abilities that you either want to teach for lessons or play yourself. So I use this both ways. My students love this because we can dial in their skill set and then test them with random grooves that are within that skill set or pushing just beyond a little bit. If you just want to jump right in, the easiest way is to scroll all the way to the bottom and you can select a level preset. So these are kind of starting points for different levels. So here, level 0, if we're teaching our very first drum set lesson, so a new student, we have gold locked metrics for that skill. And here we're showing quarter notes on the hi-hat, backbeat on the snare, and 1 and 3 on bass drum. Because all 3 are actually locked in place, we don't get random grooves when we push the red button because we've told it exactly what we want out of each instrument. As the skill levels go up, so here let's go down to level 2 for example, we have some different metrics that are locked at the bottom in gold. So you'll see now we have 8th notes in the hi-hat, we have 8th notes in the bass drum, snare still on backbeat, and now when I push the red button we get random bass drums, but they're all in 8th note placements. They also follow a couple other rules. We don't have any bass drums that are under snare drums, and we always have a bass drum on beat 1. Now if we go to level 3 preset, so this is a good starting point for level 3, we'll see that we have some bass drums now starting to align with the snare drums. And if we want to go further, we can play around with some other metrics on top. So for example, if we want to do maybe 16th notes on the hi-hat instead of just 8th notes, we can click that. And look, it gives us now every single 16th note on the hi-hat. But you'll notice, unless you're playing flams or double stops, we have hi-hats over the snare. So we can also change that we want no hi-hat over snare notes. We check that box, and there we are. A more comfortable 16th note hi-hat groove with the right hand moving to the hi-hat, or sorry, to the snare drum instead of playing a hi-hat on 2 and 4. We can also change this to snare halftime feel. So we put a snare note on 3 instead of 2 and 4. And look, we also automatically took away the hi-hat above it. So this follows the rules that you set. Again, this is a level 3 starting point, so we have locked metrics that we can kind of add on top of. Typically we can only add 1 checkbox per instrument. So we got our hi-hats over here, snares, and bass drum. But let's do this. Let's go into our main tab, and now this is completely up to us what we want to do with the grooves. If you don't check any boxes, you're generating completely random on or off notes up in our groove measure, which can be maybe an excellent exercise or just a nightmare depending on your skills and abilities. So we want to refine that to something that's a little more digestible depending on what we want out of this. So for example, let's go through each of these options. So like I said, typically 1 of these per instrument. If you do like 8th notes and 16th notes, it's only going to do 1 because they're contradictory. We explored the 8th notes and 16th notes, so let's do this. Let's uncheck both. And let's check out, so a hi-hat shuffle would be 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a. So we're changing the way the hi-hat is. Snare drum locked on backbeats, bass drum on eighth notes only. So we're generating some shuffle grooves here using bass drums in the eighth note positions. So let's go into maybe 3-note grouping on the hi-hat. So here's your 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and hi-hat with the same rules for the snare and bass drum. I kind of have a jazz comping pattern, which I would swing this 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. But I wanted to include this because it's a popular pattern. So this is written square, but again, I would kind of swing. That's why I put it in quotation marks for anyone that wants to play that version of a groove with the right hand pattern. You can also go the other way. You can change the hi-hat to quarter notes only. So here we have only quarter notes on the hi-hat. Nothing else has changed. We're still generating bass drums randomly with a snare on the backbeat. Again, we can take the snare off the backbeat. Now we're generating random hi-hats and random snare drums. Again, this is a little bit of a nightmare if you don't want all of these random notes. We would refine it here. Let's go back to hi-hat eighth notes. That's very common. And let's put the snare back on backbeats only. And we can take maybe the bass drum off of eighth notes only. So now we're generating completely random bass drums. And this is a fun way to play any 16th note position with the bass drum and find some new grooves. As we uncheck parameters, we're adding more grooves. If we do eighth notes only here, and we don't line up with the snare, and we always have one on beat 1, there are 32 grooves we can play here. So if you click this, it'll generate anywhere between 1 and 32 patterns. If we uncheck some of these, so if we don't put it on 1 and we don't or we do put it under the snare drums, but we're still on eighth notes, now we're generating up to 256 patterns. So you see it increases exponentially. Let's do this. Let's go back to the most common enhancements down here. Let's take off the bass drum eighths again. And let's talk about the enhancements. So like we said, we can put a bass drum on 1, or we can kind of turn it into more of an exercise, or maybe we don't have a bass drum on 1 every single time. It's kind of cool because you're hiding the downbeat a little bit. It's a great exercise for keeping time without the downbeat or the first anchor point. We can put a bass drum on 1 and 3 only. So if you're doing a lot more hands stuff up top, if we have metrics that are playing around with the hands more, maybe you want a simple bass drum just to kind of keep time. So you got the downbeat and the halfway point on beat 3 here. And then again, we can either put bass drums under the snares or not, based on what we check here. We can also add the left foot. So if I check this box, now you'll see we have a left foot line, and we're generating random left foot hi-hat notes using the left foot. We can also mirror the left foot to the snare drum. So if you're just wanting to do kind of the backbeat hi-hat sound with the snare, you can do that here. It also works if we remove the backbeat and just add the halftime. So now we've seen that the left foot mirrors the snare over on beat 3 instead of 2 and 4. We've talked about no hi-hat over snares. That would be, again, for if we're adding 16th notes on the snare. That's a good way to approach 16th notes, but you can do it for other reasons we'll talk about in a minute too. We talked about left foot mirroring the snare. You can also have the left foot on quarter notes only. So if you're just keeping time with the left foot underneath the groove, you can do that here. Or you can keep time using eighth notes on the left foot as well. So all those are options that are very easy to turn on or off. We can add left foot sizzles on the last hi-hat note. So here's a open hi-hat on the very last note. That applies no matter where we put the hi-hat. So if we do 16th notes, now the last note is the If we do random hi-hats, it's going to do whatever one is the last position. Go back to eighth notes here. Let's turn that sizzle off. We can do all the offbeat sizzles. So now we're opening the hi-hat on all of the offbeats. And we do that with the standard circle notation above the measure. Let's come down here further and let's talk about the snare drum. So if we want to do some snare drum backbeat with ghost notes, now we're talking about 2 layers with the snare drum, and we have to select that, but we also have to uncheck backbeats only, and that'll unlock all of our snares. But look, we're accenting the backbeat now. Some drummers will accent the snare, some drummers will accent both. You can play that accent either way, but what's happening is we're getting 2 layers out of the snare drum using random snare drum grooves and random bass drum grooves. But again, look, we're not playing the snares at the same time as the bass drum because we have that metric selected. We can change that if we so choose. Creates a little bit more of a wild groove situation, but again, we can control that down here. So here's one with controlled bass drum and backbeats on the snare with ghost notes. We can do the same thing with ghost notes and halftime with the snare. And one thing you'll notice is whether I check backbeat on the snare or halftime with the snare with ghost notes, it's always putting a snare in that position. Even though we're not checking these boxes, look, we'll always have a snare drum on beat 3 because that's what we're telling it we want. We want a backbeat, we want a halftime snare note with ghost notes around it. So that's what's happening here. This controls it that way. Let's add our backbeat back in on purpose, and let's talk about the bass drum. We can have 4 on the floor groove, so I've checked that box, but look, we only have 1 and 3. That's because we're following a specific rule of no bass drum under the snares. Let's turn that off, and there is our 4 on the floor groove. So now we've actually locked all 3 parameters, hi-hat, snare drum, and bass drum. So we're not generating random grooves, we're generating one groove because we've selected a metric for each instrument. Let's do, how about some bass drum roughs into the snare notes. Here we have 30-second notes now going into each snare on the backbeat because we've told it we wanted roughs into the backbeat snares. The same thing's true here. If we don't select backbeat on the snare, we're always going to have a snare on 2 and 4. Look, we're kind of creating some nightmare grooves again because we haven't controlled the snare at all. But to demonstrate what I'm saying is we're always having a snare on 2 and 4, whether we tell it to or not, because we told it we want roughs into the backbeat snares. If I add backbeat snare on the options, now it controls the snare drum and it makes it a little bit more palatable. Look at this. We still have bass drums under the snares though, so this makes it a little bit tricky. You could play that, but if it's maybe too tricky, we can turn that metric off. And there, now that cleans us up to do double stroke into the snare and nothing underneath the snare. So we're not actually doing like a triple stroke or anything. We can do the same thing with halftime snares. So let's put our double into the halftime snare. And look, this metric is telling us we want to have a halftime snare, so it adds the snare automatically, even though we've told we also want backbeat snare. So this is an interesting groove that we've told it to generate. If we want this to be a true halftime feel, you either do maybe with some halftime ghost notes down here on the snare, or we just select halftime snare by itself. And now we're generating double strokes or bass drum roughs into that halftime snare with random 16th notes around it. Let's go back here and turn the roughs off. So let's go into some more specific bass drums. We can have 16th notes on the bass drum. Now look, we've added a bass drum left foot, and we've done 16th notes based on 2-foot pattern on the bass drum. This is again locked. We're controlling every metric, so we're not creating random grooves. This is everything is being told what to do, so it's not random at all. We can also do let's see, similar idea, bass drum double strokes. How about this? For those of you who like double strokes, this is a similar groove to the 16th note as a 16th note check pattern, and now we're using double strokes, so 30-second notes per foot to play double strokes all the way through. Again, we're not generating random grooves anymore. We're telling every instrument what to do because we're controlling every single thing down here. So I skipped over a button. Let's check this out. For those of you who want to practice linear grooves, We can check certain boxes for linear grooves, and what I've done is I've added a little bit of a cheat sheet here because this is how we're going to create it, because you do have to select certain specific boxes. So let's see if I can scare everybody for a second and uncheck all the boxes. Like I said, this is going to generate completely random grooves up here. So let's refine from here. This says we're going to check C33, that's here. We're going to check J35, so that's in the middle down here. And we're going to select Q30, so Q30 is up here. So with these three metrics checked, we're making sure that no snares and hi-hats overlap. We're making sure that there's no bass drum and snare drum notes overlapping. And then this metric is the linear groove bass drum selection. So this is going to make sure that all three instruments play independently. And now look, we're generating completely random linear grooves. And essentially just go until you find one you like. And we'll talk about how to save it in a minute. Let's turn these off. We'll come back to our more standard grooves here. So let's go back to maybe eighth notes. We'll do backbeats again. Let's do these common metrics here. And let's talk about this. We can add ride cymbal. We don't always have to be on a hi-hat. So here we have ride cymbal or bell on eighth notes instead of the hi-hat. You can also have either ride or bell or hi-hat, but using all off beats. So here is the right hand all off the beat. Right now we're telling it to be a ride cymbal or a bell, but you can obviously change that to a hi-hat if you so choose and play open hi-hats. You can also add, hey, maybe all of the open hi-hats or the offbeat hi-hats are open. Maybe they're all sizzles. So there's lots of fun combinations. One of my favorites being this last one. We can go to a ride and a bell, and we can put all the beats on the bow of the ride and all the offbeats on the bell. You can also do, again, only the offbeats, and hey, maybe they're all on the bell off the beat. So again, we're randomly assigning bass drum 16th notes while controlling the hands in this case specifically. So there's one more thing we can talk about. We'll leave these metrics up. Here, let's do maybe eighth notes only for a minute. And let's talk about this. Everything we play doesn't have to be in 4/4 time. So let's come down further, and we have time signatures. 4/4 is selected by default. You see that checkbox is selected, but the second I check 3/4, 4/4 checkbox deselects, and now look, we'll come back up, and we're only showing 3 beats instead of 4. So now we can randomly generate grooves in 3/4 instead of 4/4. The same is true if we come over to the 2/4 time signature. Now we're only playing 2 beats of music. And the same is also true for the rest of these. So 7/8, we're playing 3.5 beats of music, randomly generating bass drums right now on eighth note positions. We have 5/8, so 2.5 measures, or sorry, 2.5 beats, and 3/8, so 1.5 beats of music. Again, randomly generating eighth note bass drums. Again, we have beat 1 always on a bass drum, backbeat on snare, so we have one variable essentially that we're on and off in 3/8 because there's less room for notes to be applied. Again, when I deselect all the other time signatures, 4/4 goes back to default, and we're right back to a full 4-beat measure. So now let's do this. Let's click around, and maybe we love this groove. This is a groove that we've fallen in love with. We want to save it. Or maybe it's a groove that your student was struggling and you want to come back to it later. We can save grooves by coming down to here, and we're going to click File, Download, PDF, and just make sure that it's the print setting is fit to page. And that is going to not only save our groove, it's also going to save the parameters that we use to find it. So maybe you want to print it out and assign it for homework, or just come back to it later, but that's going to give you a PDF file that you can do with what you please using all the information that you see on the screen. Let's talk about sharing this. If you know someone that teaches music, especially drums, maybe in band or privately, you can tell them to go to drumsetgrooves.com, or you can use the links at the bottom that I've set up to share for them to get their own copy. You don't want to share your copy because multiple users on the same copy will interfere with each other, and it will break essentially the formulas because you're going to be fighting each other, and it's not going to work with more than one person on a file. So just keep that in mind. If you share it, this is where they can go to get their own copy. And you can also go there to ask me questions. I'd love to know what you guys think about this. I use it all the time. My students love this. My drum set students love it. And I use it, again, for me personally when I'm practicing, but also when I'm writing music. If I have a song that has a lot of syncopation, maybe I want to find a groove that kind of matches it. And instead of forcing one through, I maybe play through this a few times. I find something that actually kind of works, and it's a fun way to make music too. So again, there's 8 million different combinations you can do here, probably more than that. So have fun with it. See what you come up with, and challenge your students. Again, this is good for any ability level and anything you want to target, whether it's hi-hat, snare drum, or bass drum. I think this is super handy for everybody. So check it out. If you have questions, you can contact me at patrickblakley.com/contact. And if you have questions, if you have issues, just let me know. If you go through here and you accidentally edit a cell that is not a checkbox, if you can't save it, I mean, there is a couple hidden backups just in case for you to access if you need. But if you get to the point where something's not working, just contact me. I'll send you a fresh copy and make sure you're set up for success. Speaking of this bottom tab, I have a user guide on my website as well. It'll come with this in the zip file bundle that you download. But also talks about duplicating tabs. So let's just say you found a groove, a set of parameters for a groove that a student is working on. You can duplicate tabs at the bottom, and you can create your own presets, and maybe you name them using the student's name, and during their lesson they can come in and then you just check their name and then start generating random grooves without pre-selecting anything. You can start right where you left off, or find a bunch of other different uses for that too. So hopefully you guys like this. I love it. I hope you guys do too. Feel free to reach out with any questions, and hey, have fun.